What's up, Photoshop fam? Hey, did you guys know that there's a tool inside of Photoshop that will remove backgrounds for you? Did you also know you should probably never use it? Stick around and I'll tell you why. What's up, Photoshop fam? I'm Rick Navarro, and this is the Pixel Laundry Photoshop Academy. Recently, I came across a bunch of videos online about a background removal tool, and I was so blown away that I had never used or even heard about this tool in the almost 20 years I've been working commercially in Photoshop. And then as I started to use it and learn about the tool, I realized why. This tool is actually pretty good for what it's attempting to do. In a professional capacity though, I don't recommend it. And this is the background eraser tool. Today I'm going to show you how to use this tool, and I'm also going to show you like 5 or 6 other ways that are like 1,000 times better than using this tool. I am a fan of anything that is going to make your life easier, more efficient, more quality driven, and any automated or automation that Photoshop can provide to you as a creator that is going to make your life easier and not fussing with, the minutia. I think is a great thing. I think that's an incredible thing. And you'll see in some of these examples that I'm going to provide for you today that, this tool has its place. And even though that's true, maybe I'm just biased because I've been using so many of the other methods for so long at this point. While this tool has its place, it's just simply not my favorite. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to show you how this tool works and why there's like a million better ways to do it a completely other way. All right, so right under here in your tool palette is your background eraser tool. It's literally named background eraser. If you've never used this tool, it erases backgrounds, but it's a bit of an oversimplification, right? Because backgrounds can be anything. Backgrounds can be solid, they can be organic shapes, they can be in cameras, they can be a background that's been blurred because of depth of field, they can be dark, they can be light, and some of the ways that this tool works doesn't really, in my opinion, kind of keep that in mind. Or it does, but it does in a way that it doesn't offer much utility to me as an artist or a creator. Let's just start with this first example, right? Ecom example. A model on a background, model on a white. And in some cases, when this is very, very simple, this tool probably shines its best. Okay, so we'll start at the top and then work our way down and slowly watch as this thing crumbles. Okay, in this particular case where you have a dark-haired model on a light background, that is the scenario. A dark-haired model on a light background or a light-haired model on a dark background. This is when this is going to work best. And let's just go ahead and dive right in and show you. First off, you have a bunch of settings up here. This first setting is called continuous sampling. And basically what that means is it's going to sample the color that's directly below the crosshair. But as I drag, it's going to continue to resample that color until it meets another one. So let's just do this so you can actually get a visual on it. I've already gone ahead and created some of these just for time's sake because there's going to be a lot of explanation here. So as I continually sample across, it's going to erase, but it's also going to erase anything that tiny crosshair goes over. So not amazing, right? We'll talk about all of these settings here in a second. Let's just go up to discontinuous. And as you can see, as long as I stay out here in the background, it's okay. But the moment I cross over into the hair, it's no good. So that's continuous sampling. Now this second one here is called sample once. Now much like the stamp tool or the clone stamp tool, I can sample out here. It's going to reference that color, and as long as that remains my sample source, now I can paint over this hair and it's going to be fine. But again, if you just saw what happened, if I drag over the darker spot, now I'm painting over the hair because it's grabbing anything dark. Or if I come in here in skin tone, now it's going to grab anything that's skin tone. This last one here is called your foreground and background. It's going to sample from the foreground and background. So whatever these are set to, at the time of usage, that's what it's going to try to eliminate. It's a color-based selection, and there's some other tools that we're going to talk about here in a second that's basically, I think, is a better way to execute this, but that's basically what it's doing. It's sampling the color based off of whatever parameter you have it set to, and it's going to erase based off of those parameters. Now, again, sure, there could be, if I'm going to use any of these, I'm probably going to use this middle one, and there is a bit of, utility to this. Like this is actually pretty strong. Like this detail here where I'm maintaining 1 pixel in thickness across these flyaways, and I'm getting a clean selection. The reason you're seeing green, by the way, is because I've got a green background layer. But if I turn this off and turn all the layers off, you can see that the transparency is doing an actually good job. But what happens when the color reflects back into the hair? Is it going to pick that up as well? What happens if it's curly hair? What happens if you have a dark haired model with a dark background? Like this works great because there's a lot of contrast between the background and the foreground. I see a ton of YouTube videos on how to use this tool, and nobody seems to really talk about that, and I'm not sure why. So I want to make sure that you guys are well-rounded in the tools that you select and why you select those tools for your personal workflow. And this is why I'm explaining this, and this is why I decided to make this video. At the end of the day, it's a lot about technique and it's a lot about personal preference, but this is my personal preference and it's definitely not this tool. But let's keep on going so you can continue to understand. So in one regard, this is actually really good, so I can use it for this. But this scenario, it lends itself to using this tool if I'm careful, because again, it's not a broad brush in the sense that it's a one-size-fits-all thing. You can use it on anything, anytime, anywhere. Let's look at some of these other examples that I'm referring to. Another good way to use this tool is probably on product. If the product is on a white background, if you're shooting tabletop products, or if you're using this in this capacity, you can use this same tool, this background eraser, to do the same thing. And again, the same rules apply. And I can move relatively quickly and get in here and erase everything that I don't need, or that is basically sample, color-based sample. If I needed to go in here and get rid of the rest of this, I can easily do that. But the meat of this work has technically already been done. Another thing about this brush is that it is working destructively, which basically means that I'm working directly on the file. So if I haven't duplicated the file from the original layer, you're gonna mess up your image. So be mindful of that when you're using this to duplicate your layer. I talk about this a lot in a lot of my other videos, but to be working non-destructively as a professional retoucher and just a photographer who is cognizant of these tools after the fact, I need to be mindful of how I'm treating these images, and I need to have the latitude to be able to go back and forth if I make a mistake, if my machine crashes, if I don't have enough history states set up in my preferences, or any number of reasons, client revisions, so on and so forth. So I have to be able to go back and forth. So these are some examples where it's being used and it's pretty strong. And I can see the attractiveness of using that, but I also know other techniques of how to eliminate the background that I think move faster. Let's go to, I've got another sample right here. And here's a great example of where this starts to fail real fast, okay? So let's go back to our background eraser tool. Let's start right here. So sampling is continuous. So the sampling is going to be based off of this varying background. There's a lot of colors that are shifting, right? It's not a flat background. It's not a white background. It's not a paper background. It's a table. So here, let's see how it does here. Okay, again, not my favorite. You can see it's trying to make an attempt at cutting out that object, but it's not doing a very good job. So let's go to the second one, where this was continuous. This is going to be sampling once. Now this background is basically a similar color, but let's see how it performs. Again, this gray is not even close. It's not even in the color range of that background. Now, I've already duplicated this, so you can kind of see that if I need to go back to the original, I can. That's fine. Let's just go ahead and put another layer in here so we can kind of get a little bit sharper contrast between what's happening. Okay. But as you can see, it's not even deleting everything entirely. It's not erasing the background like the name is supposed to imply, right? But Rick, what about those other settings? Okay, well, let's talk about those other settings. So this first one, discontiguous. Discontiguous. The easy way to remember this and the other setting I'm about to show you is that instead of contiguous, think continuous. Now, the way this is supposed to work is that if I take this sampling tool and I start to erase, again, it's basing it off of the crosshair and whatever color that it's over or where I sample, it's supposed to not go over here into this second section of the green, right? Because it's broken up by this color here. But as you can see, it's bleeding over. Now, for what it's worth, it's sampling the original color, and that's great. Like, if that's exactly what I wanted it to do, that'd be fine. It's separating out that green from the orange very, very clearly, okay? But technically, it's supposed to stop right here because it's discontiguous or discontinuous, which basically means that any pixel that is not physically side by side, it's not supposed to touch. So as soon as there's an edge there, it stops. But as you can see, it's still grabbing it. Continuous basically means the opposite. Any pixel that is physically side by side, it's supposed to eliminate. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Again, this one basically means any pixel that is physically side by side, it's going to erase, and anything that stops it, it's going to stop. So here, we don't have the same problem as the other one, but if I grab here and drag across, now all of a sudden we do. Let's try it again. There it is again. So it's not stopping, even though it's supposed to, because that middle section of green is not touching the outside section or this inside section. If I make my brush a little bit smaller and come in here, I can get this a little bit tighter. But for all this work that I'm having to do to get that cut, granted, this is as cut and dry as it's going to get. Colors side by side, solid backgrounds. Most of your photos are not going to be this. You're gonna have a model with a background. That background will either be on location or it will be in the studio. So if you're shooting products on white, maybe. If you're shooting models that have skin tone, hair texture, complexion, and a background, which could be anything, not amazing, okay? This foreground background color is basically the same way. It works based off of the foreground or background color you have here, and it's gonna be very similar to this one here. Again, I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it, okay? Find edges is also going to be based off of color, and if I come in here and I grab this, it's basically trying to distinguish, Photoshop is trying to distinguish what the edge is. Now, the tolerance settings, it works like the wand tool. If you guys are not familiar with the wand tool also has a tolerance setting, and this is basically telling Photoshop to adjust how accurate to the sample or to the selection, how accurate you want Photoshop to be. So on solids, this doesn't work as well, but if we say, let's just go ahead and create a new layer here, and for the sake of demonstration, we will grab the gradient tool, okay? If I grab the wand tool and click right here, right exactly where that pixel is, and my tolerance is set at 30, it's only going to grab so far. If I open up this tolerance to 100, it's going to grab everything that's remotely close to that color. If I drop it down to like 10, the lower the tolerance, the smaller section, the smaller level of tolerance it's going to have. That doesn't matter whether you're selecting on this side or that side. Whatever pixel you select under that wand tool is going to reference this tolerance setting for how much of that color it's going to grab. This works the exact same way. So if I've got a tolerance level that's set pretty low, if there's any level of gradient in it, it's only going to grab that color. If I have the tolerance set it very high, it's going to grab any color that's kind of like that color, okay? Let's try it with that gradient and see what happens. You see, as I slide in over here, less and less stuff was getting erased. If I go back to the backside, all this stuff will go. Let's drop that tolerance down. I'm gonna start here, and you see how it stopped. It stopped right there, okay? But if I raise it up, this isn't even in the color spectrum, and it's erasing it because my tolerance is really great. Okay, so that's how this tool basically works. Now, I want to focus on things that actually work. So let's go through here and show you about 5 or 6 ways that you can use that are far better than this tool. Now, before we do that, let me show you a better tool for something like this, okay? And that's simply the pen tool. Now, again, you can use this select subject function that Photoshop has created for us. But sometimes if you use this or something similar in your selection palette, like your selection tool palette, it will give you jagged edges. So it's already made the selection. So let's just duplicate that. And look, I've eliminated the background. But if we get close, you can kind of see these little jagged edges, and it doesn't give you a super crisp, super sharp edge. Now, in some cases, that's actually really a good thing, but in others, you may need a little bit more spot on of a selection. What I like to do is I can make a selection with something like that, select subject, and this little button right here is called Make Work Path from Selection. And instead of using the pen tool and manually going around and making my pen tool selection, which is going to give you the sharpest edge that you can get in Photoshop, if you push this little button, it does it for you. Amazing, right? Now, based off of this selection, I can from here go ahead and remake the selection based off of this path. If I just hit Command and Enter, now it's going to give me a new selection based off of the pen tool path, okay? Now you say, why would you do that? Look at the edge versus what we just did earlier. In fact, I'll just show it to you. Go back here, make selection, select subject, duplicate the subject. Look at the difference between this edge right here, it's a little feathered, versus this one right here. It's much, much sharper of an edge. This is your regular selection. This one is your pen tool. So this is another way to get this. Now, where the colors start to get close together, you're going to have a larger discrepancy, and it's going to be a little bit harder for the path to kind of work itself out. So in that case, then you can make edits on the path directly. So again, if I come over here and hit the make path, like right here, if I need to kind of refine this a little bit, I can get in here and eliminate if I need. See, it doesn't even look like it's on the edge. So let's bring that a little bit closer. Or better yet, let's just go ahead and eliminate some of these points so we don't have as much information in here creating corners. There we go. Now we can use these Bezier handles to give us a nice smooth edge. Okay, but everything else is already done. So instead of having to go through and do this manually, which is also another option, you can use a selection, create a path based off of the selection, and then recreate your selection based off of your path. A little bit convoluted, but a lot faster than having to scrub and figure out and sample and come back and refine and redo. For what? It doesn't make any sense. You want to move quick. You want to move quick, but you also want to move efficient. Of course, there's the tried and true method of just the path tool. If you grab a pen and you come in here and you can make your selections manually. And by doing this, I am guaranteeing I'm not using colors as the foundation for my selection. I'm using my eyes and my own intellect as opposed to Photoshop's to do the job for me. I mean, look how fast I'm moving through this too. There it is. Eliminated your background. Okay. So there you go. There's a couple right there. Let's keep on moving. I'll show you some more. This is a great example, and this is another one that's really fast, and it also works if the scenario lends itself to it. So if you have a situation where you've got a product on white or on a solid color, okay, but you need to change the background color for some reason, a client is making that request. Let's go ahead and add a background in here. And let's just do something like this. Okay, let's put it under. and we're going to use the blend if option inside of the layer style palette. Now I talk a lot about blend ifs in one of my previous videos. I'll put a link up here, but a blend if option will work really great here too. Again, dark product, light background. Another reason why this is great is because there's just a subtle shadow here that I want to keep, you know, and if I cut this out, or if I use any of these previous techniques, it's going to get rid of the original shadow, which is going to be the most natural shadow. And then I'm gonna have to recreate that. So I'm creating more steps for myself later on if I don't have a better way to do it, a better technique to do it. If I use the background erase tool, it's just going to eliminate anything in that color range. So since the shadow is on the light background, it's gonna be relatively light. And when you erase that, then you gotta create it again. So it's no good. So if I grab this and grab the light slider, look what just happened. I just grabbed everything in that light tonal color range and automatically eliminated it. There it is again. Pull it off, pull it on, pull it off, pull it on. Well, Rick, what about the shadow? Well, let's take a look. You can see it's separating it. Now, if I hold down Option or Control if you're on a PC and click right here, it's going to split that. And now I can slowly gradate into my product. Negatives that's happening here. Anything that's in that light color tonal range is going to be eliminated too. So how do you resolve that? How do you fix that? Well, watch this. If you'll remember, back in the beginning, I can select the subject very quickly, right? Let's just go ahead and here and grab my wand tool, and I'm going to delete anything that's kind of in that range. All right. Now, just to make sure, I'm going to get a little bit tighter and make sure that everything I want selected is selected. This is a little bit of a lower res image, so I don't have as much pixel information. I'm going to tighten up this selection. Just going to duplicate that. Okay, so the product is completely isolated. Shadow, everything's gone. Just the product. I've got the product layer, and I've got my blend if layer, and I've got my background. And because my blend if layer is directly under my product layer, now all my tonal highlights are back. So here it is without the layer, and here it is with it on. I could, now that I have it on top, I could actually even go further, right? And you can see there's just this subtle hint of contact and a little bit of color discoloration that works and allows it to ground it. Then I've got this on a separate layer, so I've got full control now. Now I can change it, you know, to any season, any season, any color season, any color palette that you want. You've got full control. Okay, let me show you this other example. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's another way to make a selection that's going to eliminate your background. Instead of using a pen tool or a quick selection, in this particular instance, this is a flattened image of a carpet with a shadow. If I tell Photoshop select the subject and all these fine details are missed, I'm gonna have to go back through here and make this selection meticulously, and it's going to take a lot of time, right? So I don't really want to do that because it's just not efficient use of time if there's a better way. So instead of doing that, I'm going to use this option here called color range. And basically I'm going to use the color range of the carpet to tell Photoshop, this is how and what I want you to make the selection based off of. Okay, so if you go into here, go under select and color range. If I grab my sampler, my eyedropper, I can basically tell it anything that is this color, I want you to grab, okay? And I've got this fuzziness slider that will refine the edge for me. So if I drag it all the way here, you can start to see the texture. I don't really want, it to be as tight as the texture. I just want it to be more on the outside. So the closer I can get this out here, the better that's going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And based off of this selection now, I could duplicate it, but still, there's still a lot of detail in here that I missed. So let's go ahead and deselect that and let's try it again. And let's see if we can't refine that mask a little bit tighter. So color range. And instead of just clicking out, if I click on this eyedropper with a plus tool, I can add to my selection. So my initial selection was out here in the whites, but I also want anything that's kind of like that or anything that's like that. Right now I've got this set to white mask, but if I put this to grayscale, you're gonna be able to see this a lot better. You see, so I've selected all of my shadow. Now I can also tell it I don't want anything that's like this or like that or like that. Okay, so you can see it's getting tighter, but it's also because there's color in the shadows, it's leaving some of that color in there. So we got to find a kind of happy balance. Okay. Now I think this gives me a better selection overall. So let's see if I can just adjust this a little bit with my fuzziness slider. And I think that's pretty good. Let's see what we got. Okay, so in here, it still left some of the selection, but that's not a problem because I can easily go ahead and add this by holding down Shift and very quickly going around and making sure that anything on the inside here, oh, went too far. Anything on the inside, any of these little pixels, these dancing ants that are kind of on the inside here, I want them to be a part of it. I don't want them to eliminate it. So just like that. Now I know I've got a ton of detail out here in the fringe. And I'm good with that. And then I can duplicate that later. Okay. Turn that off. There it is. Okay. Now you've got a little bit of this kind of ghosting happening. That's because it grabbed some of the grayscale images. And what I could do is if I grab my history brush, I can paint this right back on. And just to move quick, I basically made the selection based off of the previous one, and I'm just scrubbing it in very quickly. You can see the original color coming back. All right. So there you go. Color range, one selection, pen tool. And let's go ahead and finish strong with probably the most widely used technique for complicated selections, particularly with hair, and that is channel masks. Channel masking is probably the most widely used, widely taught on YouTube technique for making selections, and rightly so. It's a great technique. So if you're not familiar with this, you want your base layer, go over to your channels, and what you're looking for is the channel that gives you the most contrast. Now, disclaimer, this is going to work sometimes. Just like I said with the other tools, it really depends on the circumstance. If you have a dark-haired model on a light background, you're gold. If you've got a light-haired model on a dark background, you're gold. Anything that's going to give you a lot of contrast and separation, it's going to work for you really well. Now, once you step outside of those perimeters, then you got to find other ways and other techniques in order to make it work. So again, I'm looking for the most contrast between the background and the foreground. It looks like this blue layer is it. So I'm going to duplicate this right here. And I'm going to go ahead and hit Command L or Control L if you're on a PC. And I'm going to increase the contrast between that hair and that background. All I'm looking for is a lot of contrast. Okay. I don't want to get rid of all of these little fibers, all of these little hair, these hair strands. So you got to be careful because if you push it too far, you start to see it goes away. So right about there. Okay. Gonna register that in. I like to invert this selection because I want the selection to be white and the thing that I'm getting rid of to be black. White reveals, black conceals. This is how your masks work in Photoshop. But this cool technique that you can do, right? Like that was a global edit with the levels, but this cool technique that you can do to kind of isolate some of these more difficult areas is if you make a selection just in a particular area, I can focus on the contrast on that area. So if I grab just here and do the same thing, bring up my level slider, I can get a greater level of contrast in one particular area versus doing it globally. Okay, so I bring back some of these details, these fine hairs. Now the rest of this stuff like this in here, that's already been It's clearly within my boundaries. I would say these, let's just call the edge of the skin my boundaries, because I'm not going to be making a selection outside of that. I can easily just fill with white. Now, instead of doing all this, watch this. Well, first, before we do that, let's go ahead and get rid of this dark edge here. Same thing. Isolate the area, bring it all the way down. Same thing down here. Same thing down here. It's okay if I get a little bit of overlap because that's very, very clear. Look at that. I don't have to paint it. I don't have to get in there with my hand and do it and run the risk of there being variations. Moving very quickly, and it's going to give you very professional results, okay? Now, what about all this stuff inside here? Okay, well, first off, I was really only concerned with the hair. So what about that stuff in there? Let's go ahead and go here. First off, we've got our selection now. I can go back to my original layer, duplicate that. And look, I've gotten rid of the background layer and I've maintained the hair. Now I can go in here and tighten that up and maybe get rid of some of these other edges. Now you can use your background erase tool. But what about this in here, right? No good. Well, remember, there is something that Photoshop is pretty decent at, and this select subject is giving me a pretty strong selection. So if I use that selection, I can go back here to my mask, and now I don't have to finesse. I can just grab a white brush and move very quickly. I'm going to stay away from the hair because the hair is exactly the way I want it. This is not going to give you a refined hair edge. It's just going to give you a nice body edge. Okay, so now my selection is even better. Let's go back. Okay, so this is the original one with the channel layer. So I've got my hair selection there, and I'm going to go ahead and make a mask over this one here and put it over top. And now any area that didn't travel through, I can brush back in. So this is another way to kind of work non-destructively so that you're not losing any of these details, but you still get all the information that is required. Okay, some refining that needs to happen down here. But again, so much less and so much faster than the background erase tool. All right, guys, that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that helps you out. I hope that makes your life a little bit easier. If it did, please like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. If you have an idea for a show, comment down below. And until next time, stay real, Photoshop fam. Talk to you soon.